I want to welcome you to the December 15th, 2024 message here at Meadowbrook Baptist Church called The Adoration of the Magi from Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. Last year on December 6th at Sotheby's auction house in London, a small painting measuring just 9.6 inches by 7.2 inches called The Adoration of the Magi sold for $13.7 million. Just 2 years earlier, Christie's auction house valued the painting at $15,000 and was advertised as being painted by someone in the circle of Rembrandt, somebody under Rembrandt's Van Ryn's influence. But speculators began to suggest that perhaps the painting was a legitimate Rembrandt. And in 2021, that painting, that small painting, went for $1 million. And then last year, as the auction approached again for this painting, those who had bought the painting the first time had infrared scans done and x-rays, and all kinds of experts come in and study that painting intensely of the Adoration of the Magi, and it was determined, in fact, it was a Rembrandt. And so it sold for $13.7 million. Back in 2016, a family in Rome was cleaning their house, and a large painting of the wise men of the Magi, Adoration of the Magi, which was hanging over their fireplace or something, got knocked off by accident. In the process of repairing and restoring the painting, research was done by this Francesco, and this lady named, her last name is Francesco. And in the process, she began researching and found that that painting as well was a Rembrandt. And it had just been hanging casually in this family's living room, and they found that it was worth $240 million, a much bigger painting, but of the Adoration of the Magi. Over the past 2,000 years, the picture of the Adoration of the Magi, of the wise men worshiping Jesus, sometimes at the manger, sometimes in a house, but the picture of the wise men offering their gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh to the child Jesus has been a popular subject of art for these last 2,000 years. Depictions of the wise men worshiping Jesus were even found, or have even been found on the walls of the catacombs underneath the streets of Rome. It has been quite a popular thing to paint, particularly even more so in the Middle Ages. Around the 13th century, a man from Genoa, Italy, named Jacobius de Voragine, wrote a book called The Golden Legend, in which he recorded a lot of different legends that he didn't know for sure, but a lot of them had to do with different things in the Bible and tradition. And one of the legends he recorded was the revelation of the Magi. And of course, different ideas of what the Magi, the wise men, that there was three wise men, and who they were descended from, and all this sort of stuff, but none of it founded on fact. But as people read and heard about this man's book, The Golden Legend, they became very interested, and the wise men became even more popular as far as the object to be painted, particularly in the early 1400s. All the way from Florence, Italy to Antwerp, Belgium, famous painters began painting the Adoration of the Magi. One of these paintings, a painting by Hieronymus Bosch, was sold this past who painted the Magi Adoration of the Magi in 1425, sold this past August in Clarence, New York at an estate sale for $415,000. Now, I probably won't be buying my wife, Patricia, one of these famous paintings. It's simply, for Christmas, it's simply going to be out of my price range and my budget for this year's Christmas season, at least. But one thing I will be doing is I will be worshiping someone more priceless. The wise men gave these these expensive gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And sometimes we're in awe of the gifts. But what the real gift is Jesus. And he's priceless. The painting are very expensive, high priced. But the paintings celebrate the birth of Jesus, he is priceless. As we look at the adoration of the Magi in Matthew 2, 1 through 12 this morning, we will find that wise men and women, wise boys and girls still come to worship the King who is worth it all. The wise men worship Jesus as King. Well, we come seeking to worship him as well. In Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 12, we read about the visit of the wise men, the visit of the Magi. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Christ was to be born. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will be the shepherd of my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and make a careful search for the child. And as soon as you find him, report to me, so I too may go and worship him." After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with the mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshiped him. And then they opened their treasures and presented him with the gifts of gold and of incense and of myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. So after Jesus was born in Bethlehem, in Judea, during the time of King Herod, wise men, or Magi, came from the east to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one born King of the Jews? We saw a star in the east and we've come to worship him." I know I've told you before that every year at the Christmas pageant growing up, I always wanted to be Joseph or an angel or one of the wise men. But I always wind up being a shepherd in my little mustard yellow terry cloth robe. But as we take, and I long to be a wise man. The wise men had the crowns, silver and gold crowns that were usually made out of cardboard covered with tinfoil. But I wanted one of those crowns. I wanted to be one of those wise men. But this morning, as we take this journey with the Magi, with the wise men, all of us have an opportunity to be a wise man or a wise woman or boy or girl. We all can come this morning and we have the opportunity to kneel down and bow down and worship the newborn, worship the King. There's a lot of misinformation that has arisen about the wise men. First, we don't know how many, we sang a while ago, we three kings of Orient are. And, they weren't really from Asia, but in those days, actually, if you were east of the Mediterranean, they did refer to that as part of the Orient, but not in today's meaning. We don't know how many wise men there were. A lot of times because there are throf gifts, they began thinking, well, there must be three wise men. But for up to 500 A.D., in fact, many of the tradition was that there was 12 wise men, not 3. In 500 A.D., someone decided, well, these 3 wise men need names: Gaspar, Balthazar, and Melchior. Gaspar, and they even assigned races to them, that they were descended from the 3 sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And one of them represented the continent of Africa, another represented the continent of Europe, and another represented the continent of Asia. But that just simply, that's not true. We don't know how many wise men there are. We just know there are 3 gifts. We don't know what their names were. We call them we 3 kings, but we're going to find out that they really weren't kings. One man, in Frederick I, the king of Germany, in 1164, claimed that he had found the 3 skulls of the wise men, with their eyes still in the skulls. And he built a shrine of the 3 kings out of gold. And supposedly the 3 skulls of the wise men are there today. The 3 wise men may have represented king or a king, but they were not kings. They could have been representative on behalf of their king, but they themselves were not kings. They came from, they were called Magi, which signifies a particular group of learned scholars and political and royal advisors that came from what would be known as modern day Iran. But that time was the area where they came from was called Parthia, and kind of the northeastern part of Iran. The Magi were an ancient priestly class of scholars and really astrologers that studied the stars, or astronomers, kind of astrologers if you think about it, because they actually attached religious significance to the stars. They were very prominent during the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. In fact, when Nebuchadnezzar came to attack Jerusalem, he had a guy there named Nergal-Sharezer, and he was one of the Magi, the wise men that were advising and were one of the king's princes and political advisors. But they really became prominent during the reigns of Cyrus and Darius, the kings, when they became kings of Persia. They started out around 700 years or so before Christ, and they were led by a man named Zoroaster, who developed there was a monotheistic religion, just one God represented by fire, and all of they offered sacrifices at their place of worship and so forth. But it had a lot to do with fire was their symbol. They believed that as they studied the stars, their God put those stars in the sky, and all those stars have particular meanings. And when a new star came into being, it represented the birth of a king. They studied various manuscripts of various religions, seeking to find meaning. You find a lot of information about these Magi from the book of Daniel. In fact, Daniel is represented one of the king's advisors who interpreted dreams. And dreams, as we saw in the verse 12, that they were warned in a dream to return by a different route. And Daniel, when he's able to interpret Nebuchadnezzar's dream, when all the Magi couldn't do it, Daniel was able to do it. And so he was appointed over all of the Magi in Babylon, in the Babylonian Empire. And when Darius comes and defeats the Babylonians, he too makes Daniel one of his chief political advisors, one of these wise men. Of course, he worshiped the one true God of Israel. But it's probably very likely that during this time, of course, the Israelites, the Jews were there in Babylon for a long time, at least 70 years by the time of Daniel, and much longer thereafter. They had exposure, would have studied all of the religious texts, the prophecies about the promise of a Messiah, a coming king to be born in Israel. They, as I said earlier, they believe that the appearance of new stars symbolized, or signaled rather, the birth of a new ruler. They would have probably been familiar with Numbers 24:17, where Balaam, a prophet in the Old Testament, says he saw a coming ruler, a star will come out of Jacob. Now, Magi were also known throughout the Roman Empire. And later in AD 66, when Nero was the Roman emperor, we find that Magi came to honor and worship him when he became the new ruler. We find Magi elsewhere in the New Testament. We find in Acts chapter 8, one named Simon Magus, that was there in Acts 8. He's also called, another one we find in the book of Acts is Acts 13, Elymas. Sometimes they are referred to as sorcerers or even magicians. And the word magi, by the way, is the word we get magic from. Because as they studied the stars and dreams and all of this, they kind of devolved over time into what we know as more like magicians, and they were very superstitious. But this time they come, and not as a group of magicians, but as wise men coming from Parthia or Persia. They had traveled quite a ways. I figured about 1,100 miles. That's like about from here to Albuquerque, New Mexico. Can you imagine traveling that far? And more than likely, I'm sure it wasn't a group of three, but perhaps of many. In fact, if you read in Isaiah chapter 60 and some other prophecies that indicate there was probably a good group that came with the Magi. This group of men, however many there were, whatever their names were or are lost to history. But what is not lost to history is that they came seeking to worship Christ, the newborn King. They came to worship him. And the emphasis here in Matthew, as I mentioned a couple weeks ago, as we studied Matthew 1 through 17, is that Jesus is the true King. And they come asking, where is the one born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east, and we've come to honor him, to bow before him. That word worship means to kneel and to bow, to prostrate yourself before this one, to recognize him as King. This morning, as we make this journey towards celebrating Christ's birth, have you come this morning to worship the King? Are you seeking the one born King of the Jews? Now, when King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. These Magi came to Jerusalem following that star, and they're asking all around, where's the one born King of the Jews? We want to worship him. That disturbed King Herod, who himself bore the title King of the Jews. As we look through Matthew, the question, of course, is at the end of this book, when Pilate and Herod and all those ask him, are you the King of the Jews? And the answer is, yes, he is. Jesus is. Now, Herod had been appointed, first of all, the governor or prefect of of Palestine from like 45, 46 BC to about 40 BC, when he got a new title from Antony and Octavius. Octavius becomes Augustus Caesar. He's given the title King of the Jews, and he reigns from 40 BC to 4 BC. King Herod was amazing. He did some amazing accomplishments. He built the fortress at Masada. Perhaps you've seen pictures of that. He also built other towns like Caesarea in honor of Caesar. And most importantly, began the rebuilding of the temple there in Jerusalem in 19 BC. He did some good things. When there was a famine in 24 BC, he took some of his own treasure, his own gold, and melted it down and sold it to use to buy food for the people of Israel. So there were some good points, but the older he got, the more paranoid he got, and the more suspicious he got, and the more protective he was of the title King of the Jews. He was an Edomite. He was not Jewish. He had married a famous woman. He married into a famous family as part of what was called the Hasmonean dynasty that were part of the Maccabees. And he married into that family, even though he was a descendant of Esau, an Edomite, so that he would have some kind of connection to royalty there in Israel. But he was a pretender. But as he got older, he became very suspicious of everyone around him. He even had two of his sons killed. He had his mother-in-law killed. He had the high priest killed. And he had his own wife killed. Caesar Augustus said of King Herod the Great, "It's safer to be Herod's pig than Herod's son." He was suspicious of his own family, that they were trying to take over. So you can see when these people come looking for where's the one born King of the Jews, it gets his attention. When Herod was upset, everybody was upset. When Mama's not happy, you've heard that phrase, no one's happy. Well, when King Herod was upset, everybody was upset. See, when the wise men came to worship Jesus, to honor him, to recognize him as king, but King Herod did not want to worship the king, but to kill the newborn king. So he summoned the chief priests and the scribes, the leaders of the people of Israel. He asked them, now, we have these people asking around, where's one born King of the Jews? Where is the Christ? Where is the Messiah to be born? And they quickly respond that it is written, the prophet, that's Micah 5:2, he says, "But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least from the rulers of Judah, but out of you will come one who will be the shepherd of my people, Israel." The teachers of the law knew exactly where the Messiah was to be born, the son of David. This was one of the prophecies. You know, in the Old Testament, there are at least 330 prophecies about Jesus about the coming Messiah in the Old Testament that are fulfilled in one person, Jesus Christ. See, the question in the book of Matthew is Jesus the King? He's descended from Abraham, the son of David. Of course, we know that he's the son of God. And here they come looking for the King of the Jews. Is he? Does he fulfill the prophecies? 330 prophecies about Jesus Christ in the Old Testament were fulfilled in the New Testament in Jesus. Lee Strobel said that the possibilities of that happen, one person fulfilling any 4 of these 330 prophecies is almost like 1 out of 10 to the 80th power. 10 with 80 zeros behind it. But Jesus fulfilled in his birth, life, death, and resurrection 330 predictions, promises of the Old Testament are fulfilled in Jesus Christ. He is the King. He is the King of kings and Lord of lords. He is the King of the Jews. Now, you would think that the chief priest and teacher of the law would be excited about the news of the wise men coming, but they seem to be not very impressed. You know, there are those who want to worship Jesus. There are those that are hostile to Jesus, see Jesus as a threat like King Herod. And there are those who simply don't believe and they don't care. They're more interested in their own thing. And the chief priests and teachers of law, they're not excited about this. They don't go and say, hey, let's find out, let's see if this is real or not. Once again, we see, however, that there were those in the world that were longing at that time for Messiah. Roman historians like Suetonius and Tacitus says there was a general expectation at that time that a worldwide ruler would come out of Judah. Herod, however, was going to make sure that didn't happen. He was the king of the Jews. He's almost 70 years old at the end of his life, but he was not going to give up his throne to any baby boy born to be king of the Jews. After the priest left and the scribes, he called the Magi secretly. He didn't want to make a big deal of this and give people any hope. He called the Magi secretly because he wanted to make sure there was no baby going to take his throne. And so he asked them, about when did this star first appear to you? And he says, go and search carefully for the child, and as soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go and worship him. Of course, that was not the case. Even though we're just reading it 2,000 years later, you can almost hear in his voice, you could see his duplicity. Here we have the ancient forerunner, I would say, of the Grinch. He's a mean one, Mr. Grinch. But Herod was not interested in a worldwide savior. He was only interested in his selfish rule and power. This morning, I would hope that none of us are like Herod, that rather we are looking for hope and we have found our hope in Christ. But there are those today that say, oh, this is all just a myth. There were no wise men, there were no magi, there was no virgin birth. There may have been a man named Jesus who was maybe a good man, a good teacher, had some followers, but he didn't. And he maybe even died on the cross, but he certainly didn't rise from the dead. But folks, that star did appear. The wise men did come. They were looking for a worldwide ruler, a savior. They came to worship the king. And they found him. Wise men still seek him. Wise women still seek him. And wise men and wise boys and girls still seek him. And guess what? If you seek him, you will find him. You can find him. They came seeking him. They came to worship him. It says, after this, it says the star they had seen when it rose, went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. There had been much conjecture of what this star was, and even denial of it, that there was no star. Maybe it was just a spiritual star. Hope rose in their hearts. This past couple of weeks, there's been a big upset about what people have been seeing in the skies over New Jersey. Have you heard about this? The drones, wherever they come from. Where's the drone? What are those? You know, some say they're as big as a Volkswagen or something like that. But you see something. And these men, these magi, they saw a star. They studied the sky all the time. They saw this bright light appear in the sky. And there's been various ideas going back and studying, history and And some say, well, in 11 BC, Halley's Comet came through, but that's too early. If Herod died in 4 BC, that's too early. There was in 7 BC where Jupiter and Saturn lined up, and say that could have been what they saw, this brighter star in the east they saw. Or they were in the east, they were looking west, they could have seen, when it says they saw a star in the east, they were the ones in the east, and then they went west. They were just saying, when we were back east, we saw the star rising. However, I did find, and that thing about Jupiter and Saturn in 7 BC, that could be. I don't know. But Chinese astronomers reported for a period of about 70 days between 5 and 4 BC that there was a supernova, a bright star appeared, and they report that. I mentioned earlier about the star that Balaam mentioned in Numbers 24:17. But we see a lot about the coming of Christ, which talks about a brightness, a light appearing. Isaiah 9 says, people walking in darkness have seen what? A great light. Isaiah chapter 6, Isaiah 60 verse 1, which is part of the prophecy about the wise men, 1 through 6, says, arise, shine, your light has come. And in verse 3 it says, the nations will come to that light. And furthermore, kings from the nations will bring gifts to you. And Isaiah 60 verse 6 says, herds of camels will come over your land. Young camels of Midian, Ephah, and all from Sheba will come, bearing gold and incense and proclaiming the praise of the Lord. A light appeared, and that light infinitely was Jesus and his glory. But there was an unmistakable sign in the sky. When Jesus was born, the angels came down and says, the glory of the Lord shone around about the shepherds. Even in the Old Testament, I forgot to mention that, it talked about in Exodus, the pillar of fire by day and the cloud by night, cloud by day and pillar of fire by night, guided the people of Israel. It moved. Whatever it was, God wanted to make sure that these wise men, these Magi, found Jesus. And it says when they went to Bethlehem, after they went on their way and the star that had seen the east went ahead of them until it stopped at the place where the child was. And when they saw the star, they were overjoyed. But really, that word overjoyed in Greek there's 4 words. It says they rejoice with great joy exceedingly. They rejoice, great joy exceedingly. They were filled with joy. Their journey had been worth it. They had found the Savior. The star came and stood over the place, the house, by the way, not the stable, but the house, and where they saw Mary and the child. And they came and they bowed down. And literally it says they fell and worshiped him. It says here in the NIV they worshiped him, but it says they bowed down and worshiped him, but literally it says they fell down and worshiped him. I mean, it's not, they didn't even have time to bow. They recognized him. They fell down, they on their faces, and they prostrated. They made themselves low, and they made him high. And they gave him gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. In the Old Testament, when we first read about the first son of David, Solomon, when he became king, you may recall in 1 Kings 10 that the Queen of Sheba, from that direction, came bringing gifts of gold and of incense to Solomon. In Psalm 72:10 and Isaiah 60, they mentioned the kings will bring gifts from Sheba, gold and incense. Again, the Magi were not kings, but they were royal advisors. They represent the kings of the world, bring the nations coming to proclaim praises to the king. And it happened. The Roman philosopher Seneca, which was a contemporary of Jesus, said, "You do not enter a king's presence without gifts of gold." Most, expensive metal on the planet, maybe platinum might be more expensive. I don't know, but I know this past week gold sold for $2,705 an ounce. They brought gifts meant for a king, recognizing Jesus as a king. But what gifts are you giving to Jesus this Christmas? Would you give him your heart? They brought him gifts of incense, frankincense, which was used by priests and worship there at the temple, was put with the sacrifice, was offered as incense, symbolizing the sacrifices and the prayers of the people going up to God in heaven. Jesus came to be not just king, but the great high priest, offering himself. And then there was offering of myrrh, which in the Old Testament was a symbol of joy and a precious gift given to kings as well. But it's also symbolic of death. There in Mark 15, they offered Jesus wine mixed with myrrh. When Jesus, after Jesus died, and they were burying Jesus, Nicodemus took 75 pounds of myrrh and aloes to anoint Jesus' body when they buried him. These gifts, folks, were gifts fit for a king. For a king and God in the flesh. Not just a human king, but the Son of God. They came to worship him. These Magi had taken a great journey of faith, seeking to worship the newborn King. What about us this morning? Will we worship and adore the King? I can't paint a painting. I wish I could, make my own painting of the Adoration of the Magi. I do something greater than that. In his 1816 song, Angels from the Realms of Glory, James Montgomery wrote, "Sages, leave your contemplations, brighter visions beam afar. Seek the great desire of nations, ye have seen his natal star. Come and worship, worship Christ, the newborn King." You might say, I have no gold, frankincense, or myrrh this morning. Okay? But you've got something worth a lot more. Because Jesus is worth it all. And the gift that would truly honor him is to give your all. To give your very heart to him. To give your very self to him. Will you come and worship the King? Will you join in the adoration of the Magi that saw this amazing star, this amazing light in the sky that led them on a journey of over 1,000 miles? Who came seeking something that they didn't have back in Persia. They came seeking a Savior, a King. And they found him. Being warned in a dream, they went back by a different route. I don't know if they were already suspect of King Herod's genuineness, but God sent them back a different way. God was leading them. Maybe he's leading you this morning. Maybe he's speaking to you to come and bow before him and worship him and give him your all.